welcome back to another episode of Two Legs. This is episode number 249. I am one of your two co-hosts, Andy Nichols, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host, and we're matching today. Of course we are. And that's Mr. Thomas Hunyadi. Good afternoon, Tom.
Good morning. What is it? Is it afternoon? Where is it? It's evening
well,
somewhere else?
It's afternoon for us, and it's evening for the guy below, and we're very thankful that he's here today. But hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm doing great, Andy. Good to see you. Good to see you, Adrian.
Yeah, man, and we have Mr. Adrian Sinclair, co-author of the McCartney Legacy, joining us today for episode number 249 to kind of give us a little bit of an overall history of one-hand clapping, now that we're about a week upon out from its release, and we are thrilled and honored to have Mr. Sinclair back again. Adrian, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, boys. Yeah, it's always nice to have a bit of conversation with two lads whose knowledge of Macca is as impressive as their ability to drink Samuel Adams beer. Yeah, we had a great time at the fest. Yeah, it was nice to see you.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
we did.
He's talking about selling his company.
No way.
Or whatever.
Actually, before we get to the topic, did anybody see the news? They actually casted all the actors for the biopics. Did you see those? Have you heard of any of those actors? Yeah. I did not. Adrian, Tom?
Yeah. Actually, the actor playing Ringo, I think, is the most well known. He's been nominated for an Academy Award. He's been in Dunkirk with Christopher Nolan. Actually, I think he was in the movie I got being delivered today. Actually, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Same guy that did that Poor Things, the movie that Emma Stone won Best Actress for. So, and I think maybe you should have a well-known actor for Ringo. Anyways, but I don't know. But it looks interesting. But again, I'm not going to judge it until I see the movies.
Yeah, have you heard of any of those actors, Adrian, or no?
Well, I mean, yeah, I saw the casting announcement. Was it yesterday, the day before?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as with all these biopics, I think they live or die by the Liverpool accents, don't they? Really. It's so true though.
Right.
It is.
If you can get those Liverpool accents right, you believe it, you buy into it. If they don't, then you spend the whole film just sitting there going, "Oh, Liverpool accents so bad."
Yeah. You almost think you kind of harken back to those Yellow Submarine voice actors, right? Trying to do really bad Liverpool accents, and when Macca talked about it, horrible accents, right? Couldn't get it at all.
Yeah.
Scousers were just going, what the hell is this crap? But yeah. Oh, man. But yeah, here we go. One hand clapping a week away. And Mr. Sinclair joins us today to kind of give us an overall history. As you know, Volume 2 of their book, The McCartney Legacy, will be out in December. And Adrian and Allan have both kind of exhausted this research and kind of gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. And they know the period so well going into all this history. One hand clapping, really kind of just coming on the heels of Nashville, and really that's where it kind of all starts, really, Adrian. Right after Nashville, coming back to England proper. Is that where one hand clapping begins?
Yeah, one hand clapping is a really interesting film because I like a lot of the projects Paul did. It was mainly for vanity. Like he filmed the ICA rehearsals when Wings Mark 1 got together at the start of '72. And then he filmed them on tour in the summer of '72 as well. But, none of that footage sees the light of day. And really, it's the same thing that happens with one hand clapping. You watch that film, One Hand Clapping, and it almost looks like it's been purpose made for television. It's got the kind of embedded narrative on all those little biographical things, dotted throughout. But really, the purpose of the film from the off was a vanity project. It was effectively, let's film ourselves in the studio to see what we look like on camera. That was the bare bones of one hand clapping.
It's interesting. Go ahead, Tom.
No, just saying, I had read somewhere, obviously, online, just doing research and stuff, but one page suggested that this was for rehearsals for a tour. Was there any suggestion that this was any kind of rehearsal for an upcoming tour?
Well, I mean, the band had been rehearsing the whole time they were in Nashville, and what they did in Nashville was they'd rehearse one song a day. So they'd go down to Curly Putman's garage, They would song every day until they got it wrong. When they came back to England, but really, the thing is, when they came back to England, the band were in complete disarray. They were actually pretty close to dissolving, the Wings, by the end of their Nashville visit. It's interesting because we all think of that Nashville visit as this kind of this magical period where Wings are bonded, and they all went to the Grand Ole Opry, and they hung out, and Paul had his birthday over there. They recorded Junior's Farm, and you think it was all harmony, but the reality is the exact opposite, really. I mean, the band were completely at war for half the time that they were in Nashville. So it's incredible, really, that anything creative came out of that period whatsoever. But as I said, one hand clapping was really, it was kind of an extension of that rehearsal period. It was what Paul wanted to do is he wanted to get the band into the studio, and he wanted to see how their chemistry appeared on camera. Because as a member of the group, plugging away on his bass or on the piano, he's not seeing what's happening around him or behind him. He wanted to see if the band had chemistry and if they sounded any good. So he arranged for David Litchfield to assemble a small camera crew and film them in Studio 2.
At Studio 2. And what was the connection with David Litchfield? How did he find? Did he know Paul? Where was the connection? How did Paul come to bring him into this project?
I mean, the choice of Litchfield was a strange one because really Litchfield was a publisher, and he made a monthly arts publication called The Image, and in June 1974 Litchfield published a catalogue of Linda's photos, and it was through doing that he met Paul and Linda. So Wings came back from Nashville, and Paul decided to go into the studio and film the group. And logically, who would you choose to come and film you in Studio 2? Would you pick a film director, or would you pick a guy that you've met who happens to publish an arts publication? I mean, there's no rhyme or reason behind it. It was probably one of those Macca and Linda herbal jazz cigarette kind of moments when they decided to pick Litchfield.
It's interesting because at the base of it, okay, we've got the album coming out in a week, but this was always going to be a film project first. It was never going to be an album. It was going to be a film, documentary type thing, and it's even harkening back to Let It Be, if you want to call it that, just documenting the film working. And as you pointed out earlier in our discussion, filming, he wanted to film his Wings rehearsals, he wanted a visual aspect of how the band looked. And that's a part of McCartney's career that's not really talked about. You mentioned it now, but wanting to see how the band looks, how's the staging. It's a visual aspect that's very interesting that McCartney wants to actually see. How does the band, forget how they sound, how do we look on camera? How do we look? It's an aspect that's not often discussed.
No, I mean, and Paul, I think he's also obsessed with archiving his own life, So, you've got a wife who's a photographer, so why not have a camera kind of occasionally popping up and filming aspects of the development of Wings and, family life. The McCartneys carried around an 8mm camera when they were on holiday and things like that, so that they were constantly documenting their lives inside and outside of the studio, whether it be on still, video, or audio.
Go ahead, Tom.
You mentioned the band war, so I think we should mention. I mean, at this point, we have two new members, Jimmy and Geoff. Let's talk about their entry into the band real quick.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Jimmy had been in and around the group since sort of November '73 when they did the Paris sessions. And then Geoff kind of joined the fold much later, about 6 months later. I think it was May, June time in 1974. But with it, so this, Nashville was the first time that they all came together and worked together. And I think the idea of going to Nashville was obviously a brilliant one. It's one of the kind of spiritual musical homes of America, isn't it? So why not go somewhere like Nashville and open yourself up to the influence of country music? But I think the intensity of them all living together was really kind of what the problem, was really the issue with Nashville. the intensity of three guys in Jimmy, Denny, and Geoff Britton, all living under the same roof in a room with no air conditioning, in the height of summer. So yeah, there was that intensity, and those three personalities, they never really gelled from day one. Those three guys, and we document Nashville quite extensively in our second book.
Right.
We've got a whole chapter dedicated to Nashville. I think it's probably one of the longest chapters in the whole book as well, and it's pretty much day for day.
How long was the whole trip to Nashville, Adrian? Sorry to interrupt you.
Honestly, I think it was 6 weeks, but I can't say that for certain, but I think it was 6 weeks that they spent over there. It was from June through to July, mid-July, and like people know, there were some brilliant things came out of Nashville, and I worked with some great people over in Nashville while we were working on the book, including a journalist called Steve Morley, and Steve's actually I believe hosting an event in Nashville, which is going to mark the 50th anniversary of Sally G. Because between me and Steve, we've actually managed to nail down the exact date and location of when Wings went into Printer's Alley, which was the 25th of June 1974. So that's coming up to 50 years since they went into Nashville. And so anybody who's in and around the Nashville area, keep an eye out for that. I believe they're holding the event possibly in a place called Skull's Rainbow Room, which was the place everybody believes the band were at the night that Paul was inspired to write Sally G, but me and Steve have found out otherwise. So yeah, there's like I say, Nashville was a fascinating period, and coming out of Nashville, the band were going to go one of two ways. It seems like on one day Paul was kind of swinging towards the idea of cutting Geoff Britton loose, and then on other days he was swinging towards the idea of getting rid of Jimmy and Denny because they were just so much trouble. Then you come back to London and they're in the studio doing one hand clapping, seemingly all playing happy families when you see them on camera together.
Yeah. So the idea is conceived while in Nashville. There's all the plans are getting started there, and then they just go right into it. Or do all the details get worked out once they get back?
No, I think it was something that they worked out once they got back to England. I think Paul and Linda went to Scotland to have a little breathing space from the rest of the group. And in the meantime, there was some interesting interviews in some of the music papers with people like Denny and Paul's publicist, and to all intents and purposes, Wings were on the brink of,
And this is right around the time where the band starts to get a little more formal with the contracts, right, with MPL, and this is where the business things kind of get a little complicated here. And is this part of the struggles of the band at the time?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were offered contracts in Nashville. So this would have been, percentage points on records. They'd have had percentage points on tour, box office takings on tour. And you'll find out in this wonderful new book that's coming your way in December that those contracts, basically by the end of Nashville disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah, and you'll find out in the book why.
Okay.
Right, and because we talked about in the first volume how Denny wasn't able to sign a contract because he was already under contract, already. So, but Geoff and Jimmy, they're free to sign whatever they wanted at that point in time, I guess.
Yeah, just about. I think when Geoff joined Wings, he was still under contract, but he was cut loose from his contractual obligations. Jimmy was also under contract, and I think his contractual situation was a little more complicated. But yeah, I think to all intents and purposes, they could have signed a contract really at that time.
Okay.
Interesting. So back in London. How soon do they start recording the film after the Nashville trip? Are they back in England long before they start?
Yeah, there's about 6 weeks before they start recording One Hand Clapping. Yeah, so they returned to London probably mid July, and they filmed One Hand Clapping across 6 sessions. So it was August 24th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th.
Okay.
That was the initial filming.
You got the exact dates then.
Yeah.
Of course he does.
And then they filmed some pickups in October, on the 8th and 9th of October. But some of those sessions, those August sessions were Paul on his own. So, Paul did the backyard tape.
Yeah.
He did a session on his own he did a full session on his own at the piano, which we've only seen a fraction of. I think in the new set we're going to get a few more glimpses of some of those recordings.
Yeah, like Long and Winding Road and Let It Be.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I was flicking through the track listing, trying to make sense of what we have and haven't heard, and I think out of the new set that's coming on June 14th, there's 8 tracks that haven't been made available officially on bootleg, or officially or on a bootleg.
So Power Cut, right? With the full version of Wildlife, Let It Be, Long and Winding Road. I'll Give You a Ring.
Sally G, Tomorrow.
Yep, Tomorrow. Yeah. So, yeah.
So yeah, I think there's 8 tracks in total, and you'll get. We're also getting things like High, 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 issued, unedited.
The full version.
Yeah, the full version. So for anybody who's kind of sitting on the fence about this release, because they go, oh man, we've got the bootlegs, we've heard all this before. Actually, there are probably a whole disc's worth of stuff there that you've never heard before. So yeah.
On the track listing, we talked a few weeks ago when the first track dropped, Adrian did some detective work regarding Junior's Farm, and it almost drove him mad because that is a mashup of at least, 3 versions of Junior's Farm, if not more, that's coming out?
So. Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, when I started looking at it, I thought the start of the track's quite clearly, I think, from the August take, and then it cuts to Paul saying "Take me down, Jimmy," rather than saying "Take me down, James," which I think was on the original take.
Yeah.
I thought, hang on a minute, So it looks like they've spliced it together, and then I think at one point the guitar solos from another take. So yeah, good luck to all the guys out there in the forums picking that one apart, because I spent about 2 hours looking at it, and in the end I just gave up. So.
So it's a real Frankenstein version of Junior's Farm. On one hand, it's not going to be a bona fide thing. There's all bits pulled in from the official, the other recording tracks. So that's interesting. If that's just going to be one track, it'll be interesting to see what else is represented here coming out on this official set.
I mean, is it Giles Martin's been let loose on this, hasn't he? Which gives you a sense that if Giles has had access to every take, then there's a chance that some of the takes we're presented here might not necessarily be the ones that we've heard on the bootlegs, but time will tell.
I've seen interviews with Giles, and he says that he just does what he's told, really, and essentially he does the work, he presents it, and then they tell him what to make how to make the changes, or not necessarily how to make the changes, but what changes to make, right? So I mean, if that is the case, then it might not necessarily be his doing. He might have been told to do that.
Oh no, I mean, Giles isn't a guy who's going to go out of the way to splice 3 or 4 takes together of one song, particularly with a set like One Hand Clapping, which is supposed to be a live recording. So yeah, it's an odd thing, but I honestly don't think there's going to be too much of that. Just looking down the track listing, I think that a lot of this will just be the master takes that were prepared for the film. That we're going to be getting here, along with a few bits and pieces of outtake. But it's interesting though on the Giles Martin front that Giles is working with Paul, so you sense that maybe Giles is working on something else alongside that. Maybe he's working on the film. The documentary film Man on the Run alongside it. I don't know I don't know anything about what Giles is doing, but I just found it interesting that Giles is associated with something like One Hand Clapping.
Let's
Go ahead,
talk
Tom.
about that for a second. Let's talk about the imagery of the film, because we know it wasn't shot on the best well, it wasn't shot on film, it was shot on video, right? And he didn't use the best video product that was out there, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that was a call made by David Litchfield. He decided to film it on a format called U-matic.
U-matic tapes. Oh my God! If
yeah.
anybody has one of those machines still, U-matic tapes. Wow, antiques.
Yeah, I mean, you're a fellow video professional, Andy. Yeah, you know what U-matic is. They're these huge tapes that are, bigger than our first volume, right? They're massive, and they recorded really good high fidelity sound, but the picture quality was terrible. And then to make things even worse. Litchfield, because you can't really edit U-matic. There was no facility for editing U-matic. They had to have everything transferred to film, to 16mm. So they had a horrible video format, telecine to film, to edit. So that's why when you see the versions of One Hand Clapping, that like the one that was on the McCartney archive edition, that's about as good as it gets, really. Because the picture quality was dire.
Well, unless you give it to Peter Jackson, he might be able to clean it up.
You never know what Mr. Hobbit will be able to do.
Well, it's interesting, on the picture front. I heard from a very reliable source recently that there had been some tapes relating to One Hand Clapping unearthed within the last 12 months and handed to MPL. So it's possible that some of that material will get used, in the upcoming documentary. But whether or not they have, recovered all of the original rushes, I don't know. It's just something that I was told by one of our book contributors. Basically, he said that they'd recovered some materials relating to One Hand Clapping.
Interesting. And you wonder, I mean, we've got Man on the Run coming out, we think probably at the end of the year. This is obviously a bona fide audio release, but who's to say that the actual film will come out at some point this year, or if it even does after all this work? Is it even worth it? Upgrading it, will the film come out at all? I would like to think it might, but what are your thoughts on the film properly coming out at all?
Well, I think that at the moment they're dedicating all of the resources at MPL to making sure that the film is as good as it possibly can be. I think that will probably come down to perhaps having things retransferred in 4K, that kind of thing. So I think that's probably why an upgraded version of One Hand Clapping is not very high on their to-do list right now. If you're making a big Hollywood documentary, that's going to consume all of the resources that MPL have in terms of film.
It'll be interesting to see how much of this One Hand Clapping footage actually makes it into Man on the Run, and in what form, and how good it'll be. Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, no, I mean, it's not cheap to restore film or video or anything in that sense. So.
Yeah. Hey, listen, if it's all about the sound quality. If the music's good, fine. I mean, I'm sure they'll tell this tale properly in some truncated version, I'm sure, not to the level of detail that Adrian and Allan have gone through, but I'm sure this little brief 6-week period in time will be covered somehow in this Man on the Run documentary coming out at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, our book will be obviously a great companion to anybody who goes out and buys the One Hand Clapping. They can read all about, how and when it was made.
You told us in New York in February that the Nashville chapter was going to be the one that really everybody kind of goes gaga for, and I can't wait to read that one.
Yeah, well, it's one we're particularly proud of. Yeah, I mean, I think it was the same with the first volume. I remember, I think it was chapter 6 in volume 1 was my favourite, which is just Paul and Linda in Scotland. Vacationing in different places, but I think the reason why I enjoyed that so much is because we found out so much new information. I spent a lot of time in the archives, newspaper archives, and piecing together Paul's life and finding out lots of new things is always fascinating. And Nashville, we really do precisely that. We get to the bottom of why was Jimmy arrested. Why were the band at war when they got home. Where were they the night that Paul was inspired to write Sally G? All of these things that McCartney fans have been trying to find out for decades, we've got answers to in this book. So I think that's what makes it so exciting, really.
what can you tell us by day here? Day one. What can you tell us? Which is going on. I mean, are the day one? Are they right away going into and performing live songs?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, that they were recording rehearsals in Nashville. So really, when they came into Abbey Road, they were already pretty polished. It's not like they were coming into the studio and learning how to play Soily for the very first time. Right. They had that song down already. Yeah. So yeah, it was really just working through what would be their live repertoire. But I don't think Paul really had any plans to tour at the end of 1974. The intention was always to record another album. So, but yeah, really, like you said, a lot of people believe that what they were doing was working up a live repertoire, and really that was what they were doing. But Paul had no intention to go on the road, so
not yet at all.
Not yet.
Yeah. When does the Backyard take place? If you can tell us.
I think that was
probably.
I'd have to check my copy of the book here. Paul recorded the Backyard tape on August 30th.
Oh, okay.
And he recorded quite a lot that day. So he recorded Sweet Little 16, Loving You, We're Gonna Move, Look Over There, Freight Train, Cumberland Gap, Rock Island Line, When I'm Cleaning Windows, Blue Moon of Kentucky, Sally G, Blackpool, Blackbird, Country Dreamer, Peggy C, 20 Flight Rock, I'm Gonna Love You, and 1985. So that was a pretty intense day filming on his own there, Paul.
So they lumped this period together. I mean, obviously, One Hand Clapping is a separate project, but they lumped all of the bootlegs. They lumped these two periods together: the Backyard tape and One Hand Clapping. Obviously, it's so close together, time chronology-wise. I guess it makes sense to do that. But it's totally two. One's just Paul by himself in the backyard, and picking away on some tunes, and one's a bona fide project with a band.
Yeah, I mean the Backyard tape's an interesting one because they recorded it as a standalone piece, and actually it was edited into a standalone film with its own title card and everything.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so there is a film of the Backyard tape, just the Backyard tape,
just the Backyard tape, and we've seen.
And it's got a little introduction, which is the sound of the milkman, I think, at Paul's house.
Oh wow! So that was going to be its own film too. Wow.
That's right. Yeah, I think what happened was they made One Hand Clapping, and Paul really didn't have intentions of trying to sell it to a TV network, but I think basically they started in the process of the edit, and David Litchfield kind of persuaded Paul to show it to some TV executives. And you can read the response that Litchfield got to the film from TV executives from the BBC, and it wasn't very polite. I think probably because of the quality of the visuals weren't good.
I mean, Band on the Run is number one in the UK right now. I mean, Macca is probably at the height of his powers right now, and then he's getting turned away from this. Go ahead.
And also, obviously, let's not forget, okay, James Paul McCartney, we're just about a year removed from James Paul McCartney special in the UK and the US too, depending on your viewpoint, was a success or not. So people are like, what, Wings on TV again? No, we saw you once already, and you did a variety act, and it was crap. So they probably weren't too keen on doing it again.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the factors why the TV networks weren't that interested. The James Paul McCartney special was just hammered critically.
Yeah.
And I think if you watch One Hand Clapping, there aren't many tunes on there other than the ones maybe from Band on the Run that a lot of viewers would really know. I think if Paul had gone and done a concert of Beatles tunes, then the BBC would have bitten his hand off. But he's there playing tunes like Soily in 1985, which we were, as Macca fans, we all love them. But to TV executives, they're thinking, well, where's Yesterday in the Long and Winding Road,
Right. And we're not, context is everything, right, Adrian? Looking back on it, we don't want to see Soily and Babyface and I'll Give You a Ring. Where's the hits? And at least the James Paul McCartney special had that horrible section there of everybody singing Beatles songs, which gave it some credibility. The old Dapper singing Yesterday horribly.
But they were working on this project for so long, because obviously they did brass overdubs on Babyface when they were in New Orleans. So this is February 1975. They're still working on One Hand Clapping.
Interesting.
And if you look at the copyright at the end of One Hand Clapping, it says 1975. So quite clearly, Paul, still wanted to apply a few coats of gloss to that production, even when there was no chance he was going to sell it to a TV network. So yeah, I think that's maybe why the backyard tape was given a production treatment and a title card. Maybe they thought that the BBC or ITV might take that as a little
instead.
kind of,
yeah, maybe they'll put that out instead. Yeah,
they could play it out as an interstitial or whatever between a few shows on one of those channels. So yeah, that was given a full production treatment.
Oh, wow. Amazing. I never knew that was going to be its own separate film until you just told me. Wow.
Yeah. There's, obviously there's the mission from this new release, and that's Suicide that's not being included with the set, which is kind of odd. I mean, for me, Suicide's always been kind of like a throwaway track for me, but I get the importance of keeping the integrity. You want to make sure, everything is there. You want everything to be released, right? As fans, we want everything to be released, but...
Comprehensive. Thoughts on that, Adrian?
I mean, are we? I don't know. Are people more sensitive now? Is it something to do with the lyric? Is it because the song's already been dropped as part of one of the many other copyright dumps they've done in recent years?
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to look at the One Hand Clapping set in the most cynical way, and I don't, because I'm really looking forward to hearing it, and I think it's great.
Right.
Most people would perceive it as a copyright dump. The copyright's coming up in August,
yes.
And if they get the set out, that secures the copyright for another 50 years. So.
You wonder. I was going to ask you about that. If he's just thinking, is this another way to just do a copyright dump and maximize profits on it? But this seems to be a little bit more publicized. It's not like the 1963 recordings with the Beatles, which was just a straight, low key, dropped out of sight. This is a little bit more of there's a little bit of a marketing ploy here with this, obviously, with this project now. So it could be both. It could be both, and obviously it's 50. There's no album to celebrate with a release in '74, right? So how do we commemorate the 50th anniversary release? Okay, we've got Underdubbed, which came out in February. How do we capitalize on a 50th anniversary in '74? Oh, okay, let's drop One Hand Clapping.
Yeah, and in a way, Paul had the same problem back in '74 when he was between albums. Capitol and EMI were crying out for a new album. In the middle of 1974, they were desperate for another album, and Paul offered up Cold Cuts, that was even given a catalogue number by Capitol and was slated for a release kind of at the end of '74. And then when Paul started work on what became Venus and Mars, Cold Cuts was given the Cold Cuts treatment.
So Adrian, let me ask you a question then. If Cold Cuts comes out in '74. What do you think's on it at that point in time?
Well, I mean, the track listing would have really been made up of, songs that didn't make during the Ram sessions, Red Rose Speedway. Right. Probably a couple of Linda's cuts as well. Maybe Oriental Nightfish, Wild Prairie. Some of those tunes might have been on there. Maybe a few live songs from the Newcastle and the European shows that were recorded in '72, Newcastle show in '73. They quite a lot of material kind of, sitting on the shelf really at the end of '74. They could have put out a double album easily of Cold Cuts. Yeah.
You're looking at Seaside Woman, Mama's Little Girl. Stuff like that.
Cut anyway, but you look at the historiography of McCartney. Cold Cuts is a project that generally falls between that later period of 77, 78. It's interesting to see that it goes way back further and given a catalog number, as you say, even from 74. So that's these are little things that you just find out, obviously with your research.
Wouldn't it be brilliant at the end of 2024 for Paul to drop Cold Cuts, as it was prepared back in 74 as a 50th anniversary?
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you talk about these copyright dumps. That gives me hope that we're going to, in 10 years, that gives me hope we're going to get those Ramon sessions, David Foster sessions, all the stuff from the 80s that didn't get, Lindiana, I Love This House, stuff like that didn't get, a proper release. That gives me hope that we got this proposed double album now. We got this. We got the underdub. I bet you in 6 years we're gonna get the proposed McCartney 2 double album as well.
This sounds like it's going, because obviously when the archive campaign is dead, but this sounds to be like another way to kind of keep archive stuff going, but in a way that his team feels is marketable and profitable with these standalone things. I mean, if that's how it's going to be, we'll take it. But as it is, this is how it is now.
Yeah, you get the feeling that we're now moving into a period where we're going to get these kind of smaller releases that are like the recent underdubbed that are easier. They're easier to sell. They're cheaper to make. They're cheaper to sell. You can do the slightly deluxe version with the vinyl and everything, and they can drop those progressively until eventually they get to London town, when they maybe will do something more substantial. But yeah, it's a depressing thought that we're going to have to wait until 2028, to get London town, and 2029 to get Back to the Egg.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they give some great performances here. I think the vocals that Paul does for these performances are fantastic. Especially 1985 are just some of his best. I mean, I think he's top of his vocal form here.
Yeah, I mean, Geoff Emerick, I think, said in one of his final interviews, actually, before he passed away, that it was the best live project he ever recorded. He said that he said Wings were on fire, and so that speaks volumes, really, coming from someone as experienced and as Geoff Emerick. Yeah, I think that the band were on really good form. During the filming, during all of the filming, I think they were really tight, and you could tell that they rehearsed, obviously, in Nashville before those studio sessions. When we spoke to Geoff Britton, one of the things he said to us that he was so frustrated about, having exited Wings, was that when he listened to those acetates of the one-hand clapping recordings, he said they were just so good, and he couldn't understand how the band could be so tight. And yet, he ended up being given the elbow, 5 months after those recordings were made. So yeah, wow. But I think the recordings speak for themselves, and that's probably the reason why they're being issued as a standalone audio set. I mean, they are brilliant recordings, brilliantly recorded. The band are on top form, and I'm really excited to hear them.
Geoff Britton was with Wings for a grand total of how long, Adrian?
So he first auditioned in May, and then he was given the boot in February of 75. So
right.
Not very long, less than a year, 7-8 months, something like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Not because he's not capable of playing the drums. It's more or less just because of chemistry with other band members.
Well, it's interesting, actually. I was watching One Hand Clapping for the first time in a while before I spoke to you guys today. And the one thing that really jumped out to me was some of the little moments they capture in the control room. And there's that one moment really early in the film where Linda says, "Oh, Geoff, you're coming in a beat too late." And he says, "Oh, no, it's a beat too early. It might be the other way around." And you just kind of get that kind of... that's one tiny little example of the pressure that Geoff was being put under. Nobody was complaining that Linda's Moog parts were a half a beat out or anything like that, but yet they get into the control room and Geoff is getting critiqued over his drumming, and you could just kind of sense, even in that little moment, that is this a band that's going to stay together for very long, or how long is it going to be before they eventually turn on Geoff? And it really didn't take them long.
No.
Wow.
No, and apparently from everything we've heard, and I'm sure we'll find out in Volume 2, that him and Jimmy didn't jive too well. They didn't jive much at all.
No, I mean, they were guys from two opposite ends of the spectrum. You had Jimmy, who was a hard drinking Glaswegian, and Geoff, who grew up in London, who was teetotal and devoted to martial arts outside of the studio. So you couldn't have two greater opposites really than Jimmy and Geoff. And even the physicality of the two of them. I mean, you've seen the that crazy scene in One Hand Clapping where Geoff's doing all the crazy karate moves, and then can you imagine wee Jimmy doing that kind of thing? I mean, if he'd stood next to Geoff, he was probably a foot shorter than him.
Talk about contacting Geoff, and I know you obviously talked to him quite a bit. What was it like reaching back out to him and getting him to help you with some research for Volume 2?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of sensitivity with Geoff. He did interviews in the 70s, 76 and 77, and had his fingers burnt, and he kind of really went underground. After that point, really, just kind of went completely off the radar and said that he wouldn't do interviews again. And then he turned up in Nashville just before the pandemic, and he'd been persuaded by Dan Ely, from Nashville, to go over there and do the Juniors Farm. Was it Juniors Farm 45 or something like that they did?
Something like that.
And he did a couple of interviews over there, and really it was through connections in Nashville, particularly Dan Ely, that we managed to get in touch with Geoff. And I actually flew to see Geoff where he lives, because he doesn't live in England anymore, and we just spent some time getting to know each other, and eventually we sat down and did an interview, and then during the pandemic, we kind of became pretty close actually, and spent a lot of time speaking on the phone together, and then we spoke quite a lot more after that at length, really. It's just a shame that that Geoff wasn't around for longer really in Wings, because his voice in our second book is a really important one. You'd almost
equate it to how important Denny Seilwell's contribution was to Volume 1 in a way.
I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, he is the Denny Seilwell of
Volume 2. Even for 7 months, the guy was in the band for 7 months, and in those 7 months, did so much. Right, between Nashville and then going back to England and starting Venus and Mars in New Orleans before getting the book.
And Geoff even helped us establish exactly where and when the band met Professor Longhair in Nashville, in New Orleans. So lots of those kind of tiny little details we've managed to get to the bottom of, thanks to Geoff. Like I say, a really important voice in our second book, and we're eternally thankful to Geoff and his partner Magpie for all of their help, really.
I'm glad he's at a point, 50 years on, that he feels he's willing to talk about it. And then, he waited decades, to tell his story, and I'm glad that he's still willing. And bravo to you for making the sacrifices and the connections to interview and document it, because he was willing to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, when we started doing this project, we did a lot of our interviews over Zoom, and then I started realising how important it was to make a personal connection to people, and I started doing more interviews in person. I met Geoff in person. I actually met David Litchfield, the director of One Hand Clapping, in person. I travelled all the way down to the Isle of Wight, where David lived, until David actually passed away last November. And I spent the weekend just hanging out with David Litchfield and talking about his life and his association with Paul, the projects he did, and he told me some wild stuff. Some of the stuff's not even in the book. He told me all these brilliant stories. I remember over dinner about hanging out with Denny Lane, and he said things like, every time he went to see Denny Lane, there was something. There was some sort of incident had happened as he was arriving at Denny's riverboat on the Thames. Like one day he arrived and Denny had a black eye because Jojo had clocked him, and then he told me another story about arriving to find Denny's Rolls Royce on bricks because someone had stolen the tyres, and. I think he told me that Denny made a pass at his wife as well, Litchfield's wife. He just told me all these brilliant stories, and there's like a catalogue of them in our book that are related to the story that we're telling.
Well, we have, courtesy of you, a nice little sound clip that you actually recorded in one of your chats with David Litchfield in a pub. Don't know when it's from, but we're going to drop it actually right now.
It was a story which I have retold a few times, which was when we were having a disagreement one day, over something in the direction the video was taking when we were editing it. And he said, "You don't know what you're talking about." And I said, "Neither do you." No, I know. It's sort of our private film school, really, isn't it? I said, "Well, yes, it is." So neither of us knew what the fuck we were doing. He liked that. He liked the idea. I didn't go into a sort of hissy fit over it. I liked the idea that we worked together on things. We worked, for instance, using these video cassettes at the time. It was ridiculous.
Pneumatic, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. You couldn't edit the stuff. It was totally wild. You couldn't sync it. The only thing it had going for it was that you could put a soundtrack down there. So the quality of the sound and all the stuff that did with him is absolutely brilliant. The quality of the vision is shit. Because I had to change it from video to film to edit it. And once you'd gone one generation, I mean, the quality just disappears. But I think the point was that I think this is what it was, that I got on very well with him, and I liked the idea that he was happy to experiment if I was, and I was. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, don't get me wrong, and using video I found very exciting, but neither of us knew what the fuck we were doing.
And that was you in a pub, right? You and David in a pub?
Yeah. We hung out in a pub for a few hours and had a conversation. Then we had dinner together. Drank a few glasses too many of red wine, and it was a lot of fun that weekend. So I think it was back in 2018.
I was just going to ask you when that recording was. When was it from? Yeah.
Yeah, 2018. Yeah, apologies for the sound. It's because we were in a pub and
hey, I mean, it's a lot.
Where else to interview someone?
Exactly. Hey, it's no Now and Then original demo. Okay, we didn't have to do that much work to it.
Did David and Paul carry on a working relationship after this event?
Yeah, I mean, beyond One Hand Clapping, in November '74, Litchfield made this film of Geoff Britton in a karate tournament in London, called Empty Hand, and that's never seen the light of day. And that was Geoff competing in a karate tournament at the Sobel Centre in London against a Japanese team, and it was really brutal, to the point where I think the final scene of the film is one of the Japanese fighters being checked over by a medic, and he asks this Japanese fighter if he's passed any blood, and this guy says that he's pissed blood basically, and this guy had a ruptured kidney from the fight, so that's how brutal that was. And then beyond '74, they had a continued association for a really long time, and there's a lot of stuff that Litchfield did in the '70s that's never seen the light of day. He used to go out and film things for Paul on a whim, seemingly. Like when Bob Marley came to England, I think in 1980, Litchfield went out with a film crew and filmed Bob Marley just for Paul's archives.
Just for Paul's
archives, yeah. And then they had a continued association for a really long time, the two of them.
Good stuff. So the album will come out next week. The film, hopefully one day we'll see the light of day. We've talked about it, of all this work, 4 or 5 days on the film. I mean, Paul even had the brass guys come back in, right? Howie Casey, the guys that he brought those guys back in for these sessions as well too. Were you able to interview? Were you able to interview Howie and those guys for Volume 2?
Yeah. I mean, Howie came in and played his sax part, didn't he, on Bluebird? And then Del Newman came in. And then, Del Newman, the arranger, ended up giving Linda piano tuition, I believe. There's a few interesting stories that kind of, come off the back of One Hand Clapping. I think they even made a music video of, I think it was 1985, using the One Hand Clapping footage. and that's the reason why when you listen to it, it's the commercial version of the song with Paul singing and overdubbed.
Okay.
Right.
Because there was a possibility that they were going to use that as a music video. But
With him with the
that's never-
standalone mic, with the backing
That's right.
behind him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's never been used.
No,
but yeah,
and
but yeah. Given that it was a vanity project, they did put an awful lot of money into it. You know, bringing in a full orchestra,
Yeah.
paying the guys over in New Orleans in the Tuxedo Band to record overdubs on Babyface. You know, it was another one of those Paul productions that, you know, it took on a life of its own. And then its life was extinguished just like that, and it's never seen the light of day. You know, a lot like Bruce McMouse and all those other things, really.
Which we finally got. So who knows? I think that we will get this film at some point, whether it's this year or down the road. I think the film will come out. It only makes sense because, as we say, it started as a film project. Yeah, we're going to get this killer soundtrack, great, but it was a film, so the film will come out. It's just whenever Paul and the team decide to do it.
Yeah, I think I honestly believe that once the decks are cleared with this documentary that they're working on, I think once the decks are cleared that they'll start having, you know, more time and resources to put back into things like the archive projects.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to underestimate just how much resources go into making a film. You know, because you think they've got to revisit all of the audio. They'll probably get a 5.1 mix, Atmos mix, and all the other 38 mixes as music consumers want these days.
Spatial audio and all that other crap.
That's right, spatial. You know, it's and then having all of the footage up res to 4K, and you know, it's probably demanding a lot of the resources right now. And I think that the product we're going to get at the end of it, well, I kind of know the product we're going to get at the end of it is going to be incredible because I've had a little bit of an input in the production myself. I've been working with the production team a little bit on Man on the Run. So yeah, I know that, you know, fans should get excited about this film because, you know, I think it's going to be something really special.
Real on that film, before we wrap it up, Adrian, do you think, will that film, if you know it and can state it, will that film be a theatrical release, or is that just going to drop streaming, or how do you know?
Yeah, honestly, I've got no idea. And if I did have any idea, I couldn't tell you.
You couldn't tell us anyway, right?
In your opinion, do we get a new album this year? Yes or no?
Well, I think Paul's working on a solo album, isn't he? You know, so I think that will be the album this year. Yeah. And, you know, he's also working on the... Isn't there going to be a Netflix animated adaptation of High in the Clouds? Yeah, so
that's been going on for 5 years. I mean, enough already.
But I think wasn't there a press release about that recently saying that was kind of incoming?
Yeah.
So you know, and Paul was recording original music for that, and then there's the musical he's been working on as well.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of taken the It's a Wonderful Life musical. I mean, that's been kind of lost in the
dead. Yeah, it's dead. I think it's
dead in the water.
Dead in the water. Dead in the water.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think Broadway and the West End took a hit during the pandemic, didn't they? And maybe they've used that as an excuse to just kind of put that on the back burner. But who knows? You know, honestly, I've got no idea. I mean, there's just obviously quite a lot of projects bubbling along at the moment, and Paul is in his 80s now, so. He probably doesn't have the physical energy that he had, you know, even 10 years ago. So.
No, but you see on social media, like I saw the other day, somebody snapped a photograph of him walking out of MPL, you know, so he's there doing business, you know, obviously, but he's slowing down, obviously, you know.
Is this Man on the Run documentary, I mean, is it sanctioned by MPL or are they just helping?
Yeah, no, it's a co-production between Universal Music, MPL, and Tremolo Productions, who made that amazing film. Have you seen it, 20 Feet from Stardom? If you haven't seen it, go out and see it. It's the same director that made that, Morgan Neville. Right. So yeah, I mean, you're talking the cream of the cream of documentary makers in Hollywood that are making this feature. So and it's, you know, and they're working hand in hand with MPL. So yeah, it should be a brilliant film when it's done.
Give us an update. Give us an update on Volume 2. Where we're at.
Well, obviously the film's exciting, but it's not as exciting as this. You know, this.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, we're currently in the edit with our editor Carrie at Day Street, and yeah, by the looks of it, we're on course for a 10th of December drop. But don't quote me on that, because you know how frequently publishers bump publication dates. The thing is, I was having this conversation with you two guys off air. It's so easy to look at these books and think, oh, what takes so long to to put this together. But the production of our first book, I think, took 3 months, because it's 720 pages. So to print and put together, I think the initial print run in America was 30,000 copies. To print that, it takes a lot of time. It takes months. So that's why we're currently working at the moment, gearing up towards production, probably in summertime.
Yeah, but it's been available for pre-order on Amazon. I'm sure you've got a healthy number of pre-sales done already on that. So the cover, you guys released the cover artwork maybe 2 months ago, I think it was, and so it's available, and I'm sure the pre-orders have been coming through. So
yeah, no, the pre-orders have been good. Yeah, we're really excited to get this out there. I mean, we worked on these two books side by side, so effectively this is sort of 10 or 11 years worth of work where we were researching books 1 and 2, and then obviously book 1 came out, and we were writing book 2 over the last 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a culmination for Allan and I of more than a decade of our lives, and yeah, we're excited to get the second book out there. There's some great stuff in there. And it's probably a lesser known period of Paul's life. I'd say that the 70 to 73 period that our first book covered was fairly well documented already. But I think that this period that we're exploring is usually like, the sort of 50-page section of any McCartney biography, really. It's,
not too much detail, just the basics, just the travel and where the albums were recorded and the locations, and that's about it. But nothing in terms of like the depth of research in terms of like the travel and all the ins and outs of the work that you and Allan do on these books. That
and we've spoken to some exciting people for this book as well. Like we got access to the guys at Shoko who did the 75-76 tour. Yep. So we've got the inside story from the people who worked on the tour. From the sound engineers, the lighting engineers, the tour managers, you name it. We've got some great stuff to say about. Even those tours, which were at that point kind of mechanical, really, rolling from one stadium to another in America. But when you read them in the book, you find out about all this stuff that was going on behind the scenes that was, that you've probably not heard about.
It's funny. It's less. You said it's probably the lesser period that we're discovering. It's not as well chronicled, but we are really talking about Paul at the apex of his solo career, at his stardom, between 75 and 76, and that's covered in your book. But there's so many parts. If we use that as the starting point in the middle, like the high point, right? 75, 76 world tour. But then you go to the other end of that, between the lead up of that, and then coming down after the world tour between 76, 77, 78, 79. It's a high point of the book, but then there's lots of periods of. I'm fascinated to read about. Before and after the tour, the tour is going to be the tour, and we've talked about this at the fest, and the reviews of the shows, but leading up to the tour and after the tour, what Paul and Wings were really up to, and the dynamics of the band and the lineups, which is all going to be in your book in the second volume.
And the recording of an album in between the tours.
Yeah.
I mean, it's again, it's just another. It's probably going to be 800 pages, this next book. I think it's going to be bigger than the first one. But yeah, it's just another example of kind of Paul's just, restless energy. The guy just never stops, Even when, they finish the tour, they do things like the Holidays album, it's... There's always something happening, launching the Buddy Holly Week. It's, like I say, it's just endless activity for Paul. But yeah, the way you described it was perfect, really. Paul hits that high on the tour, and then it's the come down, and really it's how do you get back on the horse and find find the energy again to go again. And I suppose that's what Paul's been doing his entire life professionally.
Yeah.
Is he hits those highs and then he hits the come downs, and it's how you go again.
And again and again and again.
And again
as the song goes.
Right.
Thomas, tell us what's new. What's cooking with Talk More Talk?
Talked about 35th anniversary. We did our show Another Listen. We talked about Flowers in the Dirt and its impact and where we have it now in his canon of music, and it was really good trying to going back and revisiting it. I haven't really listened to it since what was it, 17, when it came out on the archive series, so it was fun going back and listening to that. And
in the Two Legs land,
yes,
we will be celebrating our 250th episode next week, which will be a live episode. So we're going to send an invite out to our friends, and hopefully you can join us. Don't know which day it's going to be. It's going to be one day next week. We'll post it and let everybody know. But that will be number 250, which will be a live one. 251 will be the review of One Hand Clapping proper once we get our hands on it.
It'll be a live one. It won't be a quick one.
It'll not like the Who song. Not like the Who song. No. And
one.
we don't have it yet, unlike some people that work at Sirius XM, Caitlin Larkin, who's already got a copy, and she didn't even listen to it yet. I'm green with envy because she has it and hasn't listened to it yet. And we're still waiting. We're just the minions waiting for it still, right, Adrian?
But hey, she did the unboxing video, right?
She did.
Yeah. But she hasn't listened to it yet.
No, I messaged her yesterday. I said, "Did you listen to?" I said, "How is it?" She goes, "I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet." Come on. But Adrian Sinclair, always a pleasure to have you on Two Legs. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving us a few minutes of telling us all about Volume 2, One Hand Clapping, which kind of falls into perfectly with Volume 2 of your book, which covers 74 to January of 1980. So we are just very, very blessed to have you and all the work that you and Allan have done on this book, which we just cannot wait to get our hands on, and it'll be celebrated. And thank you.
It's always a pleasure, fellas. And for anybody watching this who sees any cuts whatsoever in my picture, it's because I invested in a lousy cheap pair of AirPods that kept on breaking. So there are a few interruptions in proceedings.
But that's the beauty of editing. We just cut it all out when we make sure everybody looks fantastic and beautiful. So Adrian, Tom,
yes,
I'm Andy. We will see you on the next episode of Two Legs. Everybody, be safe. Take care.
Listening to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast, hosted by Tom Hunyadi and Andy Nichols, with musical contributions by Dylan